Women in Climate is a podcast sponsored by GIB Asset Management and brought to you by The National. GIB Asset Management is a boutique asset manager with sustainable investments at the core of their active investment business. Their belief is working together as one, bound by a common purpose to be a force for performance, a force for better. Find out more at gibam.com. Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Women in Climate podcast, sponsored by GIB Asset Management and brought to you by The National. I'm Naomi Kerbel. Last episode, we launched the Women in Climate podcast live during the World Economic Forum in Davos. Joined by an exceptional group of female leaders, we discussed how women are driving the charge towards a more sustainable world and maintaining momentum for climate action within their respective fields. And today, we're taking a step back and exploring the raison d'etre behind this podcast series, the crucial yet often overlooked aspect of the climate crisis, the gender gap. While climate change affects us all, it doesn't affect us equally. Women, particularly those in marginalised communities, are disproportionately impacted by climate change through the exacerbation of existing inequalities. Across the world, women depend more on yet have less access to natural resources, and in many regions bear a disproportionate responsibility for securing food, water, and fuel. Due to this, the UN has estimated that by 2050, 158 million more women and girls will be pushed into poverty and represent 4 out of 5 of those displaced by climate change. To make matters worse, not only are women disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis, but their voices are often left out of climate decision-making and leadership roles. Given their frontline experience, women are in a unique position to drive change. Their knowledge and perspectives are invaluable and can play a crucial role in shaping effective climate policies. It's clear the gender gap not only leaves women and girls disproportionately impacted, but risks hindering the solutions we desperately need. In this episode, we'll ask, how do we build coalitions between genders to speed up climate action? How do we amplify the voices of women to ensure those most affected by climate change are heard in the decision-making process? And what can be done to reduce the impacts of climate change on women and girls? Joining me from around the world to discuss this crucial topic are 3 incredible women. Kathy Bothmer-McLeod, Chief Executive of Climate Resilience for All, a gender-focused global NGO that's dedicated to protecting people and livelihoods from the impacts of extreme heat. Kathy, welcome. She's joining me from DC, but she's in London today. Angelica Andrade, an activist for justice, change, social responsibility in the mining sector, and a community representative from Brumadinho, Brazil. And today she joins us from Brisbane, Australia. And Rachel Kelly, climate editor at The National, who joins us from Abu Dhabi. So let's start with you, Angelica, if we may. In the introduction, I spoke about the focus of this podcast, leading women in climate, giving a platform to these women. In your opinion, how do we amplify the voices of women to ensure that those most impacted by climate change are part of the decision-making process? And talk a little bit about your goals in this space.
Well, I believe we have to recognize the unique challenges that women face whenever they want to engage in climate and social activism, and especially considering women in developing nations, the time that they want or could spend in this sort of activism is time away from work and from household responsibilities. So they would need to receive support, either financial or, for example, subside childcare whenever they are mothers and they have to step away from the responsibilities with their children. Also, making sure that they are supported to stepping into decision-making roles, such as in government or corporate boards. And in my position as a researcher and advocate, as family member of someone who lost their lives to a mining disaster, is to push for safer mining through community involvement and an approach that is not an elitist and that goes through exclusionism, but that is bottom up and inclusive.
So around that bottom up and inclusive, if I can come to you next, Kathy, Your organization focuses largely on that resilience building. And your tagline is, when women are climate resilient, we will all be climate resilient. Why did you feel that women needed particular attention?
Climate resilience for all focuses on extreme heat. And of all of the climate hazards, extreme heat is killing more people than any other. And women are disproportionately harmed by extreme heat for physiological reasons and cultural, social, religious, all sorts of reasons. And this shows up in women's inequality everywhere in the world, but particularly in the global South with those care responsibilities that Angelica talked about, plus the um, the disproportionate burden on the body. Informal women workers are bearing the brunt, and in South Asia, for example, women have a rash every day of the year that used to be 3 or 4 months is now every single day. They have headaches, they have infections, they have blisters, they are losing their pregnancies or having miscarriages due to the extreme heat. And so economically, if you are a street vendor, if the heat is melting and spoiling the things you're selling, you're losing money. And men can work at night when the temperatures are cooler, but women have to take care of their kids. So they are losing money, losing their health, and losing agency. And so women are, as the center and the backbone of communities, the very best investment for climate solutions.
Kathy, thank you. Rachel, that piece around caring responsibilities, we know the strides that the UAE has made in promoting women's rights and leadership across various sectors. But I want to understand, in your role, journalist to journalist, as climate editor, how do you feel that it's going? How do you feel that we can ensure that those contributions that Kathy was indicating there and showcasing so eloquently, that actually the day to day is not the natural day to day of a working cycle? How do we keep that up?
There are so many points to unpack and to cover on this, from gender roles, why in 2025, as Kathy's mentioned, women are still up in the night taking care of the kids, whereas men aren't. That's one thing across the board, and that's something that we see globally. I'm a mother of two small children, yet the labor goes to the female in the family in terms of managing the kids, and at the same time carrying out daily responsibilities, regardless of the country and the geography that you're based in. That's one, and that's a personal issue for me. But I'm going to go back to what I'm doing here as climate editor. Now, I want to ask all of you, when you read the news, what percentage of news source do you think are women?
Not
Roughly.
enough.
Not enough. 24%. 24%. Those are old statistics according to the World Economic Forum, but there aren't any that have been released recently. And that also coincides with the number of senior editorial staff, according to Reuters. It's also sits at around 24%. And the key issue here is that when you have such underrepresentation when it comes to news sources globally, how can you accurately report on what's happening in the world? Right? When the majority of a vast proportion of the population is represented in terms of who you're speaking to. So that's one thing. And then back to what's happening here in the UAE. I know I'm digressing, Nomi, but there are so many points to unpack in your question. And that is, I moved to the UAE in 2023 after being based in Singapore for 15 over years. And my perception here was that, obviously it's in terms of where they are on the energy front. It was an oil and gas industry. I'm covering climate, but I've been frankly quite shocked and amazed and surprised in the sense that the majority of the leaders I speak to here when it comes to climate, one, they're energy forward. You just have to look at what was announced recently in terms of, I think it's the headline was, the UAE launched a 6 billion world first around the clock renewable energy facility. So that's one, renewable energy forward. And the second is the majority of climate leaders that I speak to here in the UAE are women, the Minister of Environment, the head of the Abu Dhabi Environment Agency. So I think there's so much progress happening here when it comes to women in climate, and also in terms of what's happening within the energy industry. So I think progress is being made. I see it here moving at such a rapid clip, and I hope that that's reflective across other global markets from what I've experienced over the last 3 months in this role.
Rachel, thank you. Kathy, I just want to pick up on that point that Rachel just made. Less than a quarter of female sources from in terms of news, juxtaposed with that kind of that leadership within climate from a female perspective. But how do you feel that we can build coalitions between genders to speed up climate action? How are you seeing it on the ground?
Well, the family is the unit. If we think about a lot of in the climate solutions world, we talk about the last mile, to reach the community. Our our phrase is the last person. Let's get to a person, and the person, the woman, is the center of that family. And so we are engaging men and women because these are changes we all need. And a focus on women is um, in part because of that disproportionate impact that climate is having, but it's also on their disproportionate equipment to solve it. Women know what to do. Women leaders of countries outperform male heads of state. We had fewer deaths from COVID from women leaders. We have lower carbon emissions from women leaders. We have more investment in early childhood education from women leaders. Women on boards produce more value and on the bottom line at corporations. So women are performing, and so there's this duality of disproportionate impact and leadership that shines. And the coming together part is the shared value and the shared value proposition that shared leadership or gender equity in climate leadership would produce benefits for all of us. However, if you have been in a position of power and accustomed to that privilege, then gender equity doesn't feel like equity to you. It feels like you're giving something away. And there are research and studies and anecdotes around that. And so it's not as bright and shiny as it sounds to say we all want that equity because really we don't. Not everyone wants this. Not everybody wants us to be equal. And so we have to push against it and yet build the bridges and show the value. And everybody has to change. And it's kind of work that people have to do. Um, um, it's personal and at the same time, Rachel, we see so much progress and organizations specifically designed to lift women up in the climate negotiations, like She Changes Climate. President Mary Robinson has the Dandelion Project and all of the women's organizations around that. But we also have women's rights being rolled back and threatened, and so it's a complex landscape. But we have to keep pressing forward, and we can't just engage women. We need to engage men as well.
And to that point you made, in my opinion, it's reframing the conversation that it's not something you're going to lose. Actually, there's something to be gained. But that is not an easy conversation to be had. And sometimes it falls on deaf ears. Angelica, can I come to you? You alluded earlier to the disaster in Brumagino in January 2019. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and perhaps also talk about the consequences for women and girls in that community?
Well, I believe the most important thing that society has to keep in mind when it comes to the disaster is that it wasn't just a tragic accident, but it was the result of negligence of one of the major mining companies in the world. And the impact to my community, to my family, to so many women and children, many of whom became widows. The kids became orphans. They lost their moms. Some of some lost mom and dad. The devastating consequences of irresponsible management of tailings, which is this byproduct of mining. The impact
And for
to
those that
yeah.
don't know, this was the Brumagino tailings dam, which was owned by the mining company Vale, and it collapsed on the 25th of January 2019, which led to the loss of 272 lives, just to give that context.
Thank you. Yes, and my sister was among the victims. She had been working at Vale for nearly 10 years. She was building a career based on a lot of hard work and dedication. We were very proud of her for, as a woman, to um, gain that position in the company. And it is a stark reminder of how important it is for a mining industry, which is one of the main industries for society, for the goods and products we need. We all have cars, we all have cell phones, we all need medical equipment in hospitals. The importance of the sustainable practices of production and management of tailings, especially considering climate change, considering extreme weather events, which can suddenly create a very unsafe and unexpected condition that will impact these facilities, which are among the largest man-made structures in the world, and therefore this is a very concerning issue for all of society and all across the globe.
Angelica, thank you for sharing that. And I think I can echo all of our guests and our audience in saying we're very sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Kathy, Angelica was speaking there about extreme weather events, and I know that Climate Resilience for All, I checked it out yesterday, has the most incredible map on the website showing the different climate hazards, which include extreme temperatures. Can you talk to us a little bit about what happens when some of those areas just become too hot to live in? And again, just pulling it back into that gender conversation, where the gender piece comes in.
The world is just coming to understand extreme heat as the full threat that it is. And it's interesting and sort of twisted in the way that we've been talking about global warming for 50 years, but we're not talking about extreme heat. So we've talked a lot and have lots of solutions around flood and fire and drought and hurricanes and cyclones. But extreme heat is silent and deadly. There's no agency, there's no government agency for it. It's also something that the insurance industry, because heat is affecting human health. I mean, it does affect infrastructure also and our healthcare systems, but it's slightly different that the financial industry and the insurance industry hasn't been paying attention to it. And so that means that we're behind in understanding it. And so we haven't yet, as a society or even as governments, thought about what are the practical things that will be done. Will there be planned retreat away from places that are too hot? I mean, you see a lot written about planned retreat or managed retreat away from coastlines where sea level rise is happening and parts of communities are falling into the ocean. And those are in developed communities. Those are not in the developing world. So you think about, we're not even thinking about how to handle heat as it affects health and worker productivity. And, just to give you a sense of how big it is, a worker in New Delhi loses a quarter of their income working outside every day. And there is a big gendered component to this, as I said, because the physiological differences that women face. In our partnership with an organization in Pakistan, the women are not allowed to sleep outside. They have to sleep inside because they're not to be seen, but the men and the boys can sleep on the outside where the breeze is. And so there are all of these gendered layers to these effects. But when it becomes too hot, we can't air condition ourselves out of this problem. I mean, there are so many challenges with air conditioning, and yet it is a humanitarian response to the human body that's breaking down. Um, and and very sadly, our partner organization lost 6 members. 6 women died in May of last year in the hottest season during our program. We have a microfinance, a microinsurance program that we launched last year to support women and their lost income during heat. in India. But the point is, there is not a lot of developed thinking and planning as to how, when it's too hot, what we're going to do. And as humans do, they just respond. They adapt, they migrate, they leave. No one wants to leave, but those questions are coming, but we don't have good answers for them now.
Kathy, I'd like to come back to you in a moment around your heat insurance, which I think is a brilliant example of how you are adapting. Rachel, that point around planned retreat away from coastlines and areas, and Kathy's point around we can't air condition ourselves out of this problem. You are in probably one of the hottest areas at this time of year when we're recording. I'm keen to understand from you, do your readers care about this stuff? Are they asking for it? It's a tricky one, right? Because as you say, only 24% of news sourcing is coming from women. But I'm keen to get the take from the Middle East around the solutions and what's being demanded from readers.
Well, I'm going to rewind back the clocks a little bit to when I first started reporting on climate, and that was in 2009. And this wasn't here in the UAE, this was overseas. And I started up a segment. I wanted to focus on sustainability. And I remember at that point in time, I spoke to one of my editors, and they said, nobody cares about this fluffy stuff. Right? Literal word. Those were the literal words. Um, yes. So anyway, carrying on. So that was in 2009, and fast forward to today, there is immense appetite for this kind of content. Hence the role of climate editor. How many climate editors would you have seen a decade ago, 2 decades ago? So we're starting to see more reporting on this, not just climate editor, but climate reporting teams in newsrooms. And that's because there's demand, because people are experiencing extreme weather events. It's no longer a black swan issue where once a year we'll report on an extreme event that's happened somewhere across the globe. It's happening at home to most of us in countries across the globe. So people are looking for these stories. There is appetite for it. And they want to hear the human element. They want to understand what's being done. So I can tell you, for example, at COP29, when I was in Azerbaijan last year, some of the stories that performed tremendously well. One was female representation that we looked at when it came to the global leader family photo. It showed that just a handful of global leaders out of close to 80 were women. That story performed exceptionally well. The other one was children. There was a forum, a panel that was helmed by children from the ages of 8 to 18. And they were asking for help for the future, what's being done. And they were also speaking about what they hope in terms of a climate resilient future. The third is climate technologies. Those that looked at, for example, extracting water from humidity to help promote agriculture in desertified areas, the areas affected by desertification, as well as those that were looking at tackling heat in an urban cityscape. Where heat's trapped when you've got skyscrapers, the pavement could hit, 70 degrees? So how do you kind of cool things down? So those are the stories that do perform exceptionally well. And that's because people want to know what's being done to tackle climate change, looking forward for not only themselves, but future generations.
So, Angelica, you now study mining safety at the Sustainable Minerals Institute in Queensland, Australia. And I want to understand whether you think enough has been done in terms of protecting and empowering communities near mining sites.
I can say that there has been progress post the disaster in Brumadinho. However, it hasn't been sufficient. I can say that, for example, the legislation in Brazil has banned the type of tailings dams that fail, which is called upstream. There has been the launch of the global industry standard on tailings management, and very recently the Global Tailings Management Institute was announced. These are very important steps. However, challenges still remain. And we have, for example, many mines that still operate with dangerous disposal methods. The enforcement is still weak in some regions. There is, unfortunately, still a lack of transparency. Therefore, communities cannot be empowered if they don't have access to enough information to allow them to engage, to demand accountability, responsibility. And this is evidenced, for example, by the disclosure by ICMM mining companies um, last year when they had to report on their facilities with extreme risk. And the disclosure, um, which was public, you can see how differently the companies disclosed. And I personally felt that there needs to be um, a more robust way and more standardized way in how they disclose, so that communities can be more empowered um, to influence the industry and for their safeguarding as well.
Speaking of empowered, Kathy, I'd like to touch on what I referenced earlier around heat insurance. And I know that climate resilience for all is taking quite a novel approach in India, working with the Self-Employed Women's Association. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that heat insurance scheme that you are initiating, how it works, and also how scalable you think that is for extreme weather events, extreme heat around the world?
Yes. So, as we know, extreme heat is economically and financially affecting women workers. There are almost 800 million informal women workers across the world. And in India, temperatures reached 51 and 52 C um, in Delhi and surrounding areas. We work with the Self-Employed Women's Association. It's a labor union. They have 3.2 million members. So 3.2 million women and their families are members of this union, and they're divided by trades. So the most heat exposed trades, construction workers, head loaders in markets, waste recyclers, home-based workers, weavers, farmers, bangle makers, ship breakers. You get the idea. These are very heat exposed, dangerous jobs. We worked together with Swiss Re and their medical team and our partner at did I say Swiss Re and Climate Resiliency for All to design an insurance um, that pays when it's too hot to work. And the idea is that when the conditions become too hot and dangerous, women get a payment to their bank account. And so it's connected to each day that it's so hot. And so we worked for months to figure out what's the right place for that insurance. And as you know, we have insurance for the things that are the worst of the worst. And so we also added a layer of social protection of a cash payment that would come at a lower temperature threshold for 2 days of income support. The average Save worker is making $3 per day, and mostly extreme heat and flood, are pressing that number down. So they're now less than $3 a day because of the effects of climate change. And so this insurance with the cash plus an early warning system that's designed with the women Save members to alert them in advance. And then we've learned that they make different decisions about what they're going to buy, how much food they're going to buy because they don't have cold storage. So they buy less so they don't lose it in the heat. And they make other decisions about their kids and the kids' schedules. And so that early information is really important. And they weren't receiving the Indian Meteorological Service, the department, the IMD's warnings, so the point is that you have some insurance, you have some cash support, you also have new information about how you can protect yourself. And so we're raising the literacy, the risk literacy about heat and providing financial support. And there's so much more to this, but your question is it scalable? Yes, it's scalable. But we know that insurance alone is not the answer, particularly when people or communities are making $3 a day. And so it's a combination of things, including physical things like micro cooling stations in the market or tarps to cover their crops that also cover their roof. So when it's monsoon season, you don't get the flooding. We also use solar lights. I mean, I talked about women can't work at night. Now women can farm at night after the kids go to bed on their small holding with solar lights. And so they can still get that income that they need. It also has the benefit of showing them the snakes and the scorpions, which is another way to reduce health risks. And so physical things, cash, insurance, early warnings, a package of things that help women and their families prepare for and withstand and thrive in the face of extreme heat. And so our next cohort, we did 50,000 in 3 states. We're going to 500,000 in 5 states. And we have the program also in Pakistan, Sierra Leone, and soon Ghana. And we've just started working in Bangkok.
An incredible initiative. Kathy, thank you very much for sharing that.
Thank you for giving me a minute.
Rachel, can I come to you with a final question? And maybe everyone would like to chime in on this, because I'd like to end with some continued hope, which Kathy inspired in that last segment. Rachel, you've spent years crafting really impactful narratives, but how do you balance the urgency, the need for climate reporting, with the need to inspire engagement, hope, understanding, galvanizing people to want to be involved, to what we were discussing before? It can be quite an ostracizing topic and people don't want things to change. So how do you do that, particularly in your region?
I think what it all comes down to is a lot of the times, obviously, we're storytellers, right? As media professionals, it's finding the human element to understand why this is important, why it's relatable, and helping people to connect with a particular topic, whether it's the environment or what's happening with the economy. Because the thing is with climate, it touches all areas, from agriculture to economy to finance. It's across the board. And I think when it comes to empowering this particular topic or empowering readers to take action or perhaps even be inspired by the stories, a lot of it comes down to finding that human element and connection in the piece that you're writing and putting together. That's what I would say. And I just wanted to add in another point as well, because Kathy spoke earlier about female leadership. And if you look at Fortune 500 companies, for example, and the number of female leaders we have, I think it sits at around 10%. It's been there consistently. So I would just a word to other journalists as well that are covering climate. Perhaps don't always go for the C-suite, or even those that are in the PR profession. Don't always offer the C-suite first if it is a male leader. Perhaps look at who's an expert in that particular field. It doesn't always have to be the C-suite level. It could be a researcher that's engaged in marine biology, mangrove conservation. It doesn't always have to be that top level. Look for the experts within their field and put them forward as spokespeople instead when you're looking at empowering women to be spokespeople to the media.
Yes, fight your editor, because if your editor says only the chief exec, say the story is with the researcher. Thank you, Rachel. Angelica, a moment of hope.
Yes, if I can, I would like also to add to Rachel's point of the human element, the importance of the human. And within the mining sector, it has been for so long overly technical, and the human aspects, the social aspects have been marginalized. And if we want to build a sustainable mining industry that accounts for the environment, for the local communities, and empowering women, we need to have the human element, the social elements. That's crucial for going forward in a different way to what we have seen in the past in terms of irresponsibility and negligence. So humans should be at the center of it all.
Thank you. And Kathy?
When you think about the coming together of women, and Naomi, you said, how do we reach across that this needs to be men and women? And I so agree. But there is a power in the sisterhood and in the coming together of women and the support that women provide other women, and the confidence to lead, to lean in, to step forward, to say something, to change something. And I think idea that women are the answer to every climate question is the hope that we need is that women have the agency to, at any level, at the level of an informal worker, or at the level of a researcher, or the level to push past what are some of the biggest barriers in corporate and institutional settings to lead. And women supporting other women, a podcast like this, a statement of data-supported women lead well. The data that supports women's performance is great. And so if we support each other, we raise these voices, but also change policy and push back and show other women you can push back, and we've got your back. And I think that is going a long way in a lot of the progress that we're seeing in the climate conversations on the ground in small communities and at these big round tables where it's mostly been men. And the change is here, and the change is us.
Great way to end. Kathy Boffman-McLeod, Angelica Andrade, and Rachel Kelly, thank you very much for joining me. You've been listening to Women in Climate from GIB Asset Management, brought to you by The National. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And on the next episode, we'll be talking sustainable investing with Victoria Barron, CSO at GIB Asset Management, and Amy Clark, Chief Impact Officer at Tribe Impact Capital. Thanks for listening. GIB Asset Management is a boutique asset management firm that provides a diverse investment offering across the risk-return spectrum, in equities and fixed income, alongside their treasury business, which aims to provide effective and bespoke solutions. GIB Asset Management is based in London with an AUM of $6 billion as of December 2024.